Today, the Supreme Court took sides with Starbucks, the company, against Starbucks workers, specifically Starbucks Workers Union, in a near unanimous ruling. Unanimous is an important thing to keep in mind as I give you the details here. Now, to understand what this case is really about and why the Supreme Court ruled the way that it did, we actually need to get into the nitty-gritty legalese. So please bear with us. Everyone's already tuned out, but don't tune out, because if you're a worker, it's super relevant to you. So in 2022, 7 Starbucks workers, now known as the Memphis 7, were hired by Starbucks. They were fired by Starbucks, my bad. They were fired by Starbucks, and they maintained that they were specifically fired for organizing a union in their store. Now, this is during the time when a bunch of Starbucks stores were organizing, and Starbucks wasn't having it. They were doing everything they could to crush these efforts. The company insists that the workers were specifically fired for allowing a television crew in a closed store, which they say is not permitted. The National Labor Relations Board, though, sided with the workers in this case. And they asked the Tennessee judge to issue an injunction to reinstate the workers. Now, here's where things get super tricky. Until now, federal courts have used 2 different standards to grant injunctions in such cases. First is the more lenient one, so requiring the labor board to show that there was reasonable cause to believe the company had violated labor law. The second, though, is a little more strict, a little more difficult, if you will, requiring the board to show that not reinstating the workers would cause irreparable harm. Some courts combine elements of both of those standards. And in 2022, the Tennessee judge used the more lenient standard to basically grant the NLRB's injunction so the workers would be reinstated in the Memphis store. Now, that caused another round of legal fighting. Starbucks argued that the stricter injunction standard would be applied to all such cases. That's what they were arguing for. The NLRB, though, argued that the differences between the 2 standards were just semantics. I'm not sure I agree with that. I don't think it's just semantics. Like, one standard is harder to meet, and that's the reason why Starbucks insisted that the NLRB meet that harder standard. So the case ended up in front of the Supreme Court, which ruled 8-1 on behalf of Starbucks. They sided with Starbucks on this case and against the Memphis workers. And so Ketanji Brown Jackson, one of the liberal justices, agreed with the overall judgment, but she also dissented on some parts of the ruling. The majority opinion rejected the board's argument that the differences between the 2 standards were semantic. The reasonable clause standard goes far beyond simply fine-tuning the traditional criteria, the majority wrote. It substantively lowers the bar for securing a preliminary injunction. Whether or not you agree with that legal rationale, the consequences of this decision are clear and incredibly unfortunate for the workers. The NLRB requested fewer than 20 injunctions last year, but they serve as a powerful deterrent against firing workers who are trying to organize, said Sharon Block, a professor at Harvard Law School and a former member of the NLRB. In an interview with the Huffington Post following oral arguments in the Starbucks case, Abruzzo called the injunctions one of the most important tools available to us. She noted that workers who have been fired for organizing don't have a private right of action to sue the employer for damages. Literally, their only tool for rectifying injustice is the labor board. And now the labor board, thanks to the Supreme Court ruling, has been weakened to an extent because this case does set a precedent. So this is the kind of stuff that I believe the Federalist Society has been, nominating these conservative Supreme Court justices for, right? Like, they're the ones who have the list of the conservative pro-business Supreme Court justices. They're the ones who work with Republican presidents in order to ensure that they choose from that list of pro-corporate potential Supreme Court justices. And the chickens have come home to roost. These are the kinds of decisions that will weaken any and all protections for workers moving forward.
Yeah, and this is the type of decision that the court doesn't even blink at, right? In the sense that there's two standards and they're like, oh, we're gonna go with the stricter one. Like that's like they're gonna be, it's easy for them to justify. This is not the kind of thing where, when they struck down Roe or when they were doing affirmative action, they had to put out their little feelers to warn people that this crazy that they were about to do was about to happen. This isn't that type of ruling. This is like, look, there's two standards. We're just gonna go with the harder one for the workers. Like we don't even have to justify this. This is just easy peasy. And just so folks understand, right? A couple of things. One, what this does effectively is like, I'm sure if these workers took their claim all the way to its logical end, they could probably win in court and show that, like, if they got subpoenas for phone records and this and that and blah, 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 like they could show that management acted with malice and therefore broke a labor law, but it would take a really long time to get that done in court. And in the meantime, you're fired and it has that desired chilling effect amongst the other employees who are even thinking about trying to organize a union at the shop, right? In this case being Starbucks. And what I would say, man, to workers to not get discouraged, man, this just means we gotta be better, smarter, more nimble than these people. That's it. Like that's the only solution. Because the solution can't be to allow the status quo to just go on as it has, right? Like obviously these Starbucks shops got unionized for a reason. The working conditions have been so unfair. And so like those conditions don't change because things get harder to achieve our ends, right? And so I'm not surprised that they're fighting this way. I don't know if you saw they got Sean Fain on the investigation or whatever. They're like, we gotta go after this guy. Like, this is what they do. This is how it goes. Like back in the days when the labor movement first started in the US and abroad, what the bosses would do is they would hire thugs to come with bats and break up the picket line. Literally violence, hire thugs to beat people up for going on strike for what? Getting stuff like, oh, I don't know, a 40 or 50-hour work week. I don't know, 1 or 2 days off in the week. This is what workers were fighting for when the bosses would break their skulls, literally. And so this is how they do it now.
You make such a good point in comparing, what happened with labor back in the day compared to what's happening now. It's important to keep in mind, like all of those protections for workers weren't easily won, right? The weekend, the 8-hour workday, regulations to ban child labor, all of that stuff, like blood was spilled. Okay, literally. There are videos. This Smithsonian channel had this wonderful series called America in Color, and the first season focused on like a specific decade of like the 20th century. And so I remember watching the one where they mainly focus on Roosevelt and the labor movement. And it was just so incredible to see how far workers were willing to go to get the wins that they got for workers. And little by little, started with the Taft-Hartley Act. They just chip away at workers' ability to organize their workplace. And now we're seeing the dismantling of protections for literal children. Child labor laws are being dismantled in various states. It really is depressing. We're talking about Louisiana, we're talking about Arkansas. And I get it. Look, we do these stories and they perform so poorly. Okay, this video will get 20,000 views maybe. And then it's gonna drag the entire channel down. The algorithm will totally punish us for doing this story. But it's important for you guys to know what's going on. And so please share the word about this stuff because it's not a sexy topic, I get it, until you're at your workplace and you're upset at your conditions, you're upset at your pay, and you're upset that you don't have a seat at the table. There's a reason why that's the case. And it's because people are asleep at the wheel while, behind the scenes, you've got the people with the money organizing and fighting real hard to ensure that they change the power structure of the country for their advantage.